The buzz is impossible to ignore. At 44 years old, Alicia Keys remains one of the most admired figures in modern music. Her voice, warm, soulful, and instantly recognizable, has carried her through decades of hits, awards, and reinvention. But lately, whispers have begun to rise again. Whispers about what really shaped her journey and what, or who, she's been protecting all along, because behind the piano, behind the braids, and behind that carefully polished smile, there's a story that was never meant to be told. The truth about how her image was built, how her sound was controlled, and how power, loyalty, and silence became the defining chords of her entire career. They say silence speaks louder than words, and in Alicia Keys' case, it has screamed for years. She never spoke out publicly about the decisions that molded her. She never confronted the narratives that defined her or the people who pulled the strings behind the curtain. But the evidence, the contracts, the calculated image, the way certain headlines vanish, overnight, paints a picture that says, more than any interview ever could. Industry insiders have long whispered that two of the most powerful names in music, Clive Davis and Jay-Z, weren't just collaborators in her rise. They were the architects, the masterminds who saw Alicia not just as an artist, but as a project, a brand, a reflection of what the industry wanted the world to believe female excellence looked like: talented, beautiful, controlled, and, most of all, safe. From the beginning, Clive Davis treated Alicia like a crown jewel in a kingdom he already ruled. The legendary mogul, known for crafting stars like Whitney Houston and Aretha Franklin, saw in Alicia something rare: youth, sophistication, and raw musicality. But what the public never knew was how deeply he shaped the young prodigy from Harlem. Every lyric, every outfit, even the way she spoke in interviews, all refined and managed to perfection. She wasn't just breaking into music, she was being sculpted for it. Jay-Z entered the picture years later, but his influence was just as significant. To the public, their connection looked like creative chemistry, the fiery duet that birthed Empire State of Mind, the anthem of New York City. But to those who knew the business behind the art, that partnership symbolized something bigger, a merger of two powerful brands, where emotion met marketing and authenticity was wrapped in strategy. The collaboration almost didn't happen. According to insiders, Mary J. Blige was Jay-Z's original choice for the chorus. She even recorded an early version, but the label shifted direction. Suddenly, Alicia was the voice, and it wasn't just a creative decision. It was a branding one. When Jay-Z finally reached out to Alicia, she wasn't immediately convinced. She once recalled how Jay called her after hearing the first recording session, saying, "You think you could do those vocals again?" Alicia was shocked. She thought it sounded great. But Jay-Z, meticulous and relentless, pushed until it was perfect. The result? One of the most iconic songs in modern music, a 9-time platinum record, 2 Grammys, and a defining cultural moment. But success always has a shadow. As Empire State of Mind dominated charts, rumors swirled behind the scenes. Some said Jay-Z's push for Alicia went beyond music, that the two shared an unspoken bond, one that blurred professional and personal lines. And while neither confirmed anything, their chemistry on stage, the glances, the smiles, only fueled speculation. What complicated it all was Clive Davis' presence in the background, still guiding, still shaping, still holding a quiet power over the star he discovered. Those close to the situation say Clive and Jay-Z shared an understanding. Together, they created not just a song, but a narrative, a vision of Alicia as untouchable, pure, the embodiment of musical grace. But what happens when an image becomes a cage? From the very start, Alicia was presented as everything the industry needed, a perfect balance between authenticity and control. She wasn't rebellious like Lauryn Hill or bold like Beyoncé. She was calm, elegant, and composed, a deliberate contrast to the chaos that often surrounded other stars. But that perfection came at a cost. Her story, the one told through album covers, interviews, and flawless performances, wasn't the whole truth. Behind that image was a woman bound by unspoken contracts and silent compromises, learning to survive in an industry that thrives on control. And now, decades later, that silence is cracking. The whispers are growing louder. The truth, the one hidden behind her empire of calm, is finally demanding to be heard. Because when power, image, and silence collide, the result is rarely harmony. When Alicia Keys first walked into the offices of Arista Records, she wasn't a superstar. She was just a 17-year-old girl from Hell's Kitchen with cornrows, a second-hand keyboard, and a notebook full of dreams. But Clive Davis saw something no one else did. To him, Alicia wasn't just another aspiring artist. She was the answer to a question the music industry had been asking for years. Who can we build next? At the time, the early 2000s were saturated with pop perfection. Britney Spears, Christina Aguilera, and Destiny's Child dominated every chart. But R&B, the soul of black music, was fading into a commercial shadow. Clive wanted to bring that back, but he needed the right face. Someone who could bridge eras. Someone polished enough for mainstream appeal, but grounded enough to feel real. Alicia was that bridge. From the first day, Clive began crafting her image with meticulous care. He introduced her to stylists who would soften her street look. He connected her with songwriters and image consultants who would reframe her lyrics into something more universal. Every chord progression, every music video treatment, every public appearance, it was all intentional. She wasn't allowed to be just Alicia Cook from New York. She became Alicia Keys, the world's piano poet, the elegant voice of strength and vulnerability. Her debut album, Songs in a Minor, was more than a breakout project. It was Clive's statement to the world that real music was still alive. But beneath the success story was tension. Alicia, a classically trained pianist, wanted control over her sound. She wrote her own songs, produced many of them, and fought to protect her creative direction. But Clive, as much as he admired her talent, had his own vision, and it often came down to what sold. Behind closed doors, the two clashed. Alicia wanted to sound raw, unfiltered, emotional. Clive wanted refinement, a polished sound that could play on every radio station across America. When she pushed back, he reminded her of the stakes. You can either make art for yourself or impact the world. But you can't do both if you refuse to listen. Alicia listened, reluctantly. Her debut album went on to sell over 12 million copies worldwide. She won 5 Grammys in one night, a historic sweep that launched her into superstardom. The world saw her as an icon overnight. But few realized that her career was now tied to a silent contract, one that would shape every move she made for the next 2 decades. With every album, the expectations grew. The industry wanted a brand, not a person. Alicia became the face of empowerment, the voice of purity, the image of what every young girl should aspire to be. Strong but graceful, confident but humble. But it wasn't easy maintaining that balance. For every public smile, there was a private struggle. Pressure to remain perfect, pressure to stay composed, pressure to never slip. Unlike many of her peers who could reinvent themselves freely, Alicia was boxed into a role. The classy one, the good one, the respectable one, and in an industry built on shock value and headlines, that image became both her shield and her prison. When younger stars like Rihanna and Beyoncé began taking creative control, redefining sexuality and power on their own terms, Alicia faced a crossroads. Should she evolve, or stay loyal to the brand that Clive helped her build? At first, she tried to do both. Her third album, As I Am, showed glimpses of rebellion. The lyrics were bolder, the sound more contemporary, and for the first time, the world saw cracks in her polished exterior. But just as her music began to reflect real emotion, real conflict, her personal life started, making headlines. And not for the reasons she wanted, because behind the perfect image was a relationship that would test everything she'd built, one that would expose the vulnerability. Beneath the poise, Alicia Keys, The industry's perfect product was about to become part of one of the most controversial love stories in modern music. And as the tabloids began circling, the same people who built her image were suddenly silent. The protectors disappeared. The brand that once represented grace and purity was now tangled in whispers of betrayal, infidelity, and manipulation. For the first time in her career, Alicia wasn't being managed, she was being judged. And what the world didn't realize was that this scandal wouldn't just reshape her image. It would completely redefine her relationship with power, fame, and truth. Because when love and loyalty collide in the spotlight, someone always loses. By 2008, Alicia Keys had reached a level few artists ever touch. She was respected, adored, and untouchable, or so it seemed. But behind the cameras and chart-topping hits, her personal life was about to ignite a storm that no PR team could contain. The name that would change everything? Swizz Beatz-born Kasim Dean. Swizz wasn't new to fame. He was already one of the most sought-after producers in hip-hop, known for his work with Jay-Z, DMX, and Beyoncé. He and Alicia had known each other for years, running in the same creative circles, collaborating occasionally. But when the two began growing close, it wasn't just music that connected them. It was timing, emotion, and, unfortunately, controversy. Because Swizz wasn't single. At the time, he was married to R&B singer Mashonda Tifrere, and together they had a young child. Their relationship was already strained, but when rumors began circulating that Alicia Keys was now involved with Swizz, Mashonda didn't stay silent. In 2009, she took to Twitter, long before public statements were crafted in notes apps, and called out Alicia directly. "You know the role you played," Mashonda wrote in a now-famous post. "You know the pain you caused." The internet exploded. Fans who once saw Alicia as the embodiment of grace and moral purity were suddenly questioning everything. How could Alicia Keys, the same woman who sang about truth, respect, and love, become part of someone else's heartbreak? The backlash was brutal. Blogs called her a homewrecker. Comment sections turned vicious. Even fellow artists and insiders distanced themselves. For the first time, Alicia's carefully maintained image, the one Clive Davis had so carefully built, was crumbling in real time. But Alicia stayed silent. No interviews, no statements, no explanations. It was the silence that confused people most. For years, her fans had seen her as a transparent soul, open, emotional, real. Yet in the moment when the world demanded answers, she said nothing. Those close to her say it wasn't arrogance, it was survival. Alicia had been trained from her earliest days in the industry to stay composed under pressure, to never let emotion dictate the narrative. But this time, that silence came at a cost. Behind the scenes, Alicia was torn apart. Friends say she struggled deeply with the public judgment and the guilt that came with it. She tried to hold on to the idea that love could be pure, even when born from pain. But the world didn't want to hear that. Her next project, The Element of Freedom, reflected that turmoil. The album's tone was different, darker, introspective, conflicted. The title track itself spoke volumes. Freedom, in her world, wasn't about fame or fortune anymore. It was about peace, the kind of peace she couldn't find in the noise. Still, the controversy lingered. Every award show, every interview, every paparazzi photo with Swizz became a trigger for criticism. When the couple finally married in 2010, the backlash reignited. Many saw it as confirmation of the affair. Others saw it as the ultimate act of defiance. But quietly, Alicia was changing. The once guarded, label-managed star was learning how to reclaim her voice, not for the industry, but for herself. Years later, both she and Mashonda would publicly reconcile. The women began co-parenting peacefully, even appearing together at events, something few could have imagined back in those heated years. Mashonda herself later admitted that forgiveness was necessary, not for Alicia's sake, but for her own healing. And while that chapter eventually settled, its scars never fully disappeared. For Alicia, it marked the end of her perfect era and the beginning of something much more complicated. Because once an artist steps outside the image that made them famous, there's no going back. In the years that followed, her relationship with the public shifted. She became less about the spotlight and more about authenticity. She started stripping away layers, not just emotionally but physically. Gone were the heavy makeup looks, the glamorous red carpet gowns. In 2016, Alicia made a bold announcement. She was done wearing makeup. The world was stunned. In an industry obsessed with perfection, she was walking away from the illusion completely. To some, it was an act of rebellion. To others, a PR move to distract from the past. But to Alicia, it was liberation. The woman who had once been told what to wear, how to sing, how to be, was finally rewriting her narrative. But this transformation came with a new challenge, one that would test her again, not as a singer or wife, but as a woman fighting for her own identity in a world that kept trying to define her. Because sometimes, freedom isn't found in fame. It's found in finally being misunderstood and still standing tall. By 2016, Alicia Keys had spent over 15 years living inside the walls of perfection. Every appearance, every smile, every word carefully measured. But something inside her had shifted. The fame that once felt like a blessing was beginning to feel like a performance she no longer wanted to play. And then, almost overnight, she made a decision that shocked the world. She stopped wearing makeup. At first, it seemed like a small gesture, a personal choice. But in an industry where appearance was currency, it was a revolution. For years, Alicia had represented elegance, grace, and control. Now she was rejecting it all, daring to show her natural self to millions who had only ever seen her perfected. Her announcement came in the form of an essay titled, "Time to Uncover." In it, she wrote about the exhaustion of pretending, about how she had spent years feeling pressured to be flawless, to fit an image that wasn't fully her. "I don't want to cover up anymore," she wrote. "Not my face, not my mind, not my soul." The world reacted instantly. Some praised her courage, calling it empowering and authentic. Others mocked her, claiming it was easy to go natural when you already looked beautiful. The debate went viral. Magazines, talk shows, and social media couldn't stop discussing it. But what people didn't see was how deeply personal this transformation really was. Because Alicia's decision wasn't about beauty, it was about freedom. It was about freedom. For years, she had lived by the rules of men who controlled her image: label executives, photographers, stylists, and producers. They dictated how she should look, how she should sound, even how she should feel in public. But now, for the first time, Alicia was writing her own script. Her reawakening began during the making of her 6th studio album, Here. Unlike her earlier work, this album wasn't designed to please anyone. It was raw, politically charged, and stripped of glamour. The songs touched on racism, inequality, motherhood, and identity. Her voice was grittier, the production rougher, almost defiant in its imperfection. She appeared on the album cover barefaced, her natural curls untouched, her skin glowing under natural light. It wasn't about vanity anymore. It was about vulnerability. She wasn't selling perfection. She was showing humanity. But that choice came with consequences. In an industry that profits from illusion, Alicia's decision to reject the mask made her harder to market. Brands hesitated, radio stations favored younger pop acts, and critics were divided. Some praised her bravery. Others dismissed it as a phase. Still, Alicia didn't waver. In interviews, she spoke calmly but firmly about her reasons. "I'm done with the constant judgment," she told the Today Show. "I'm done hiding behind filters. I want to be myself, fully." Behind the camera, her friends and collaborators noticed a difference. She seemed lighter, happier, more grounded. But this new version of Alicia also came with new enemies. The same media that once celebrated her now accused her of hypocrisy. They pointed out that even during her no-makeup movement, she sometimes wore light foundation or lip balm, as if that somehow discredited her message. It was a reminder that no matter how far she evolved, the world still expected perfection, even in imperfection. But Alicia didn't back down. Instead, she used the criticism to start a broader conversation about the pressures women face, not just in entertainment, but in everyday life. She began encouraging her fans to embrace their true selves, flaws and all. "You can't be free," she said in one powerful interview, "if you're still living for other people's approval." Her movement sparked a wave of authenticity across the industry. Models began posting makeup-free selfies. Celebrities like Gabrielle Union and Zendaya voiced their support. Suddenly, Alicia's decision wasn't just personal, it was cultural. And yet behind that empowerment was a quiet truth. Freedom isn't just about being seen. It's about being accepted once you are. Even as Alicia's star power dimmed slightly in the commercial world, her spiritual presence grew. She began meditating, journaling, and stepping back from the chaos of fame. In her memoir, More Myself, she described this period as the unlearning, the process of letting go of everything she thought she had to be. That journey led her to a deeper realization. Sometimes, the truest version of yourself emerges not when you rise to the top, but when you let go of the need to stay there. For Alicia Keys, the no-makeup movement wasn't a publicity stunt. It was a declaration of independence, the moment she chose her peace over her perfection. But what happens when the world that once celebrated your freedom begins to move on without you? Because as Alicia evolved into her truest self, the music landscape around her was shifting, fast. And for the first time in her career, the world wasn't listening the same way anymore. By the late 2010s, the music world had transformed into something almost unrecognizable. TikTok sounds replaced live instruments. Trends replaced talent. Viral replaced vital. And in the middle of this chaos stood Alicia Keys, a legend in an era that no longer had time for legends. Her music had always been built on emotion, soul, storytelling, the kind of artistry you feel. But suddenly, feelings weren't enough. The new generation wanted speed, spectacle, and shock value. The kind of music that could grab you in 7 seconds or be forgotten in 10. For someone like Alicia, that shift was brutal. Streaming platforms had changed the rules of success. Numbers mattered more than narrative. Artists weren't just making songs anymore. They were chasing algorithms. And for a woman who built her empire on authenticity, it felt like a world she didn't belong to. When her 2020 album Alicia dropped, it was everything she stood for: warm, conscious, deeply human. The project was filled with introspection and soul, blending R&B with storytelling that reflected the turbulence of the world around her. But commercially, it didn't hit like before. The reviews were kind, the fans were loyal. Yet the industry? Silent. Because in the world of streaming, grace doesn't trend, consistency doesn't go viral, vulnerability doesn't sell, and that silence from the industry hit hard. For an artist who'd once ruled the Grammys, dominated charts, and embodied elegance, the lack of noise felt deafening. But Alicia, once again, refused to chase what wasn't real. Instead of bending to trends, she doubled down on her message: peace, truth, and purpose. She started performing live, stripped-down versions of her songs, sitting alone behind the piano, sometimes even barefoot. No flashy sets, no choreography, just her, the keys, and the silence in between. It was a powerful reminder, even in a world addicted to filters, there's beauty in what's raw. Still, the whispers began again. Has Alicia lost her spark? Is she out of touch? Is she still relevant? It's a cruel irony. The same public that once begged for authenticity now seemed bored by it. And for Alicia, that was the truest test yet. Because being real in an artificial world isn't just brave, it's lonely. Her team wanted her to reinvent, to collaborate with newer, flashier artists, to post more, to chase visibility. But Alicia wasn't interested in playing the game anymore. She told one interviewer, "If I have to change who I am to matter, then I was never meant to." Those words revealed the quiet defiance still burning inside her. She started hosting more intimate concerts, Focusing on the connection between artist and audience rather than fame, she launched the Keys Soul Care brand, not just as a business venture, but as an extension of her message. Beauty starts within. She poured her energy into uplifting women, encouraging them to value self-acceptance over validation. But even as her spiritual side blossomed, some critics claimed she was losing her edge. They said her music had become too safe, too mellow, too peaceful. But maybe that was the point. Alicia wasn't chasing power anymore. She was chasing peace. The same woman who once sang about empowerment was now living it quietly, without needing applause. She had seen what fame could give, and what it could take. And when you've been to the top, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from it. Yet even in her peace, the question lingered. How long can an artist remain visible in an age where silence equals disappearance? Because while Alicia found freedom, the world was changing faster than ever. Younger artists like SZA, HER, and Summer Walker were now dominating the neo-soul lane Alicia once owned. They were open, raw, and connected directly to fans through social media, something Alicia had always avoided. To the public, it looked like she had gracefully stepped aside. But to those who truly understood her journey, it wasn't retreat, it was evolution. Alicia Keys had stopped fighting to be seen and started choosing to be. And that decision to exist on her own terms would lead her to her most profound realization yet. Because the real battle wasn't about fame, love, or perception. It was about purpose. And purpose, unlike fame, doesn't fade when the cameras turn away. When the lights dimmed and the noise faded, something new began to rise inside Alicia Keys. For most of her career, her voice had been a vessel for melody. Now she wanted it to become a weapon for meaning. Fame had given her access to rooms where decisions were made, the kind of rooms where artists, women, and communities of color were rarely heard. And Alicia decided that if the industry no longer needed her to entertain, she would use that same spotlight to illuminate. Her transformation into activism didn't happen overnight. It started quietly. Backstage conversations, charity performances, late-night journaling sessions where she wrote about injustice and identity. The more she learned, the more she realized that music had only ever been one part of her purpose. The real mission was freedom. The same freedom she'd been searching for in herself, now expanding outward, toward the world. In 2014, as global headlines filled with protests over racial injustice and police brutality, Alicia began using her platform differently. She didn't just post sympathetic statements. She marched, donated, and organized. She helped launch the We Are Here movement, a campaign focused on social justice, criminal justice reform, gender equality, and children's rights. To her, it wasn't about politics. It was about humanity. She appeared at the United Nations, not as a performer, but as a citizen. Standing before diplomats, she spoke about empathy, about listening, about rebuilding communities from the inside out. And when she sat at the piano afterward to perform her song We Are Here, she wasn't chasing applause. She was preaching hope. Her message was simple. We are all here for a reason. And if we forget that, the world forgets itself. The speech went viral, not because it was perfectly delivered, but because it was vulnerable. Alicia wasn't reading from a teleprompter. She was speaking from scars. For the first time, fans saw not the superstar, but the soul worker beneath the fame. Becoming a mother deepened that awakening. Raising 2 sons in a world still divided by race and inequality forced Alicia to rethink everything she'd once accepted. I can't teach my children about truth if I'm not living mine, she said in an interview. She started advocating for mental health awareness, especially for young men. She spoke about dismantling toxic expectations, the kind that tell boys not to cry, women not to lead, and artists not to speak. Her home life became an extension of her activism, open conversations, mindfulness, accountability, and the public noticed. The same woman once accused of breaking a family was now building bridges between generations, genders, and genres. But activism didn't stop at words. Alicia began putting her money and energy into action. She worked closely with Keep a Child Alive, the nonprofit she co-founded years earlier, to provide medicine and support for families affected by HIV/AIDS in Africa and India. Through her efforts, millions of dollars were raised, countless lives extended, yet she rarely took credit. In interviews, she deflected praise with humility, saying, "The real heroes are the people on the ground. I'm just a messenger." Her humanitarian work earned awards from organizations worldwide, but Alicia's focus was never on trophies. She often said that music gave her the microphone, service gave her the meaning. In 2021, she released Keys, a double album that felt like a full-circle moment. One side, the originals, captured the soul of the Alicia the world first met. The other, the Unlocked, experimented with new sounds, new collaborators, new freedom. It wasn't a bid for relevance. It was a declaration that evolution itself is art. Each performance became a meditation. Candles, dim lights, raw vocals that felt almost spiritual. When she sang Good Job during the pandemic, dedicating it to frontline workers, people wept. It wasn't about charts. It was about connection. Alicia had found a way to make stillness louder than any beat. Offstage, she turned her energy toward mentorship. She began supporting emerging female artists, singers, writers, producers, helping them navigate an industry still laced with exploitation. She didn't just tell them to stay true, she gave them the resources to do it. Freedom, she said, shouldn't depend on fame. And that became her legacy in motion. Not the Grammys, not the record sales, but the ripple effect of courage she left behind. Alicia Keys had entered the industry as a prodigy and survived it as a prophet. She had been sculpted, criticized, adored, and doubted, and yet she never stopped evolving. But even as she grew into an activist, a mentor, a global voice for healing, the world around her still whispered. Some said she had gone soft. Others said she had transcended music entirely. The truth lay somewhere in between, because Alicia Keys had learned that impact isn't measured in headlines or streams. It's measured in hearts changed, in lives lifted, in the quiet power of choosing peace when the world demands noise. And as she prepared for the next chapter of her life, one question lingered in the air. After all the fame, the scandals, the reinventions, what does peace cost a woman who once had everything? In the years that followed, Alicia Keys began to embody a quiet rebellion, not through confrontation, but through peace. While the industry obsessed over visibility, she was mastering invisibility. She stopped chasing the spotlight and started choosing where it shined. The world had labeled her a superstar, a wife, a mother, an activist, an icon. But Alicia was finally ready to be something far rarer, herself. Her marriage to Swizz Beatz became one of the most talked about unions in entertainment. They were powerful, passionate, and sometimes polarizing. To many, they looked like the ultimate empire couple. Creativity, luxury, and legacy intertwined. But behind closed doors, they were still learning, still failing, still trying to redefine what partnership meant. In interviews, Alicia often described love as an art form. To her, it wasn't a fantasy, it was work. The kind that demanded patience, forgiveness, and the courage to evolve together. The public had never forgotten the controversy that shadowed their early relationship. Whispers that accused her of being the reason for another woman's heartbreak. But over the years, the narrative shifted. Not because people forgot, but because Alicia never fought back with anger. She let time, grace, and transparency do the talking. Together, she and Swizz learned how to coexist in the chaos of fame. He became her creative partner, co-producing music and art projects that blended hip-hop and high culture. She became the anchor of their blended family, nurturing 5 children, bridging households once divided by resentment. In one of her most vulnerable interviews, Alicia admitted, "I used to think love was something that just happened. Now I know it's something you build, brick by brick, with your bare hands." It was that honesty, unfiltered, unguarded, that made her story different. Because while most celebrities protect their image, Alicia was protecting her truth. By the mid-2020s, Alicia Keys had quietly retreated from the chaos of celebrity culture. No scandals, no clickbait headlines, just purpose. While other artists chased viral trends, she built sanctuaries, literal and emotional ones. Her home in California wasn't a mansion designed for show. It was a temple of stillness overlooking the ocean. She meditated there, wrote songs barefoot, and invited artists to create in peace. It wasn't about escaping fame. It was about surviving it. "People think disappearing means you've fallen off," she once said. "But sometimes it means you've finally found yourself." Her social media presence became softer, slower, a reflection of the woman she'd become. No filters, no makeup, no perfection. Just moments, just messages. Fans didn't follow her for gossip anymore. They followed her for grounding. Alicia had become what most stars could never manage, a mirror that reflected truth instead of illusion. Awards? She'd won enough to fill rooms. Accolades? She had them all. But now she measured success differently. Every time a young girl wrote to say, "Your song helped me survive," she knew she was doing something bigger than music. Every time she mentored a woman who refused to change her art to fit the industry mold, she saw the revolution continuing. Alicia Keys had built something that fame could never buy: impact. Not loud, not fleeting, but lasting. And still, she questioned herself. Was she doing enough? Had she made peace with every version of who she was? Those were the questions that haunted her journals. The same woman who had once stood on the world's biggest stages was now exploring the quietest corners of her own soul. Her later interviews carried a calmness that came from experience. She didn't speak with urgency, she spoke with knowing. The kind that only comes from breaking, healing, and rebuilding in public view. When asked what advice she'd give her younger self, Alicia smiled and said, "Stop asking for permission to be powerful." That line became a mantra for millions of women, in music, in business, in life. It summed up her journey better than any biography ever could. Alicia Keys had been the voice of a generation, but her greatest song was the one she lived, a symphony of mistakes, forgiveness, purpose, and peace. And yet, the story wasn't over. Because even in her quietest moments, Alicia was still evolving, still daring to create, still daring to feel. Her legacy wasn't just written in lyrics. It was etched into the hearts of those who found themselves through her courage to simply be. As the years passed, the world around Alicia Keys continued to spin faster, louder music, shorter fame, endless headlines. But Alicia? She moved in slow motion. Her rhythm was peace, her melody was truth, and her purpose had outgrown performance. The same woman who once sang about falling in and out of love was now singing about rising above expectation, rising beyond ego, rising into the kind of peace that only comes from surrender. In her later years, Alicia found herself craving stillness more than applause. She began journaling again, not for interviews or albums, but for clarity. Her mornings started with meditation. Her nights ended with gratitude. The noise of fame had once defined her life. Now silence became her sanctuary. And in that silence, she found music again. Not the kind that charted or streamed, but the kind that healed. She began writing songs for others, uncredited, unseen, content with knowing her spirit lived in the melodies of a new generation. Young artists would later reveal that Alicia had quietly helped shape their sound, their message, their courage. She didn't want ownership. She wanted legacy. When Alicia Keys first appeared in the early 2000s, she was the voice of a city. Now she had become the voice of something greater, a generation learning that success without self is just another kind of cage. She once said, "If I ever leave this world before my time, let them say I lived as a woman who refused to be silenced." And that's exactly what she did. Every era of her life told a different truth. The young girl in braids and a piano taught us to dream. The woman accused, criticized, and doubted taught us resilience. The mother, activist, and mentor taught us grace. Her story was never just about music. It was about evolution, Because Alicia Keys didn't simply survive fame, she outgrew it. And in doing so, she redefined what it means to win. Sometimes, during interviews, she'd be asked if she missed the old days, the rush of the crowd, the flashing lights, the adrenaline of chart-topping hits. She'd pause, smile softly, and say, "I don't miss the noise. I miss the connection." But that connection never really left. It just changed form. You could see it in her eyes, the kind of calm that comes when you've faced the storm and made peace with every drop. She often spoke of New York, her home, her muse, her first stage. In many ways, that city was a metaphor for her life, loud, relentless, unforgiving, but always alive. And somewhere between the subway echoes and the skyscraper skies, a young Alicia was still there, barefoot at a piano, dreaming her way into destiny. In her final public letter, Alicia wrote something that would echo across generations. If you ever lose yourself trying to please the world, pause. The world doesn't need another version of what already exists. It needs the real you, the unfiltered, unpolished, unapologetic you. Those words weren't just advice. They were a roadmap, a reminder that authenticity isn't a brand. It's a birthright, and maybe that's what made her timeless. Not the records sold or the Grammys won, but the permission she gave others to live truthfully. Imagine it. The lights fade, the piano hums, and Alicia sits in the middle of an empty stage. No cameras, no crowd, just her and the keys. Her fingers hover for a moment, then begin to play something we've never heard before. It's soft, almost fragile, like a prayer whispered into eternity. Because this time she's not playing for us, she's playing for peace. The camera pulls back slowly, the city lights below, the stars above, and her voice lingers one last time. The real revolution, she says, is learning to love yourself in a world that profits from your doubt. Fade to black. A single note echoes, long, haunting, and beautiful. That's the sound of Alicia Keys, the woman who didn't just make music, but became it. Every once in a while, an artist comes along who reminds us that greatness isn't about how loud the world claps for you. It's about how quietly you can inspire it. Alicia Keys didn't just write songs. She wrote soul into history. She showed that vulnerability is strength, that peace is power, and that purpose will always outshine perfection. Maybe that's why her story matters now more than ever. Because in an age where everyone's performing, Alicia reminds us what it means to be real. So as the music fades and the screen goes dark, ask yourself, what's your song? What truth are you silencing just to fit the rhythm of someone else's approval? If her journey taught us anything, it's that you don't need validation to have value. You just need the courage to show up, honest, human, and unafraid. And maybe, just maybe, that's the key we've all been searching for.